This might be the video I've had the most difficulty making. Hello everyone, my name is Sen, and welcome to Crouch Block, and my retrospective of The Last of Us Part 2. I want to make it clear that I don't think these will be my final thoughts, but my feelings of this game have been in a constant state of fluctuation, so I figured I'd give you what I have. I think what I want to accomplish with making this video is not just help make up my own feelings in mind, but to potentially help anyone that needs to sort through their feelings on this title. Apart from that, I want to make it clear to anyone who dismissed this game without actually playing it to give it the fair chance it deserves, even if it's just to find out how they feel after their adventure is over. Something I want to share is my not playing Part 1 on its initial release in 2013. In my mind, this is important for two reasons revolving around the same thing, and that is the hype linked with these games. My playthrough of The Last of Us Part 1 began in 2020. The hype built up over the course of the 7 years this game has been playable made it a pillar that was so grandiose that there was no possible way this game could live up to it at all in my eyes. On the other hand, for the people that did play Part 1 back in 2013, that same hype makes it near impossible for Part 2 to live up to their expectations built over the same 7 years. One last thing I want to bring up before moving on to the actual meat of the game is the rumors surrounding Part 2 before its release to the public. Out of what I know, there were leaks surrounding a major plot points of the game by a rather miffed Naughty Dog employee. This leak put The Last of Us Part 2 in such a poor light that people were declaring they were no longer going to buy the game, and that a large chunk of people were going to cancel their pre-orders because of this. In fact, I was informed by a friend of mine that was going to cancel their pre-order because of these same rumors. In my mind, I was set on playing the game even if the rumors were true. I still wanted the game to tell the story for itself and make up my own mind after the fact. That is something I can't stress enough through this retrospective. Make up your own mind. Being influenced a bit here and there is fine, but I'm not trying to make up your mind for you. In fact, you don't have to agree with a single thing that I say. Alright, now that we have all that out of the way, welcome once again to my The Last of Us Part 2 retrospective. As always, I'll start off with the score I'm going to give the game. 8 out of 10, a solid piece of game. For the first topic of discussion, I will be going over my thoughts of the graphics and visuals of the game. This may come across as being overly critical, but this game, after all, is a 2020 release. I expect nothing less than a beautiful game to look at. The Last of Us Part 1 came out at a time where setting the bar for what a game should look like is a fair bit more achievable comparatively. So needless to say, Part 2 does not have a revolutionary stepping stone going for it, but let's talk about what the game does have. A reoccurring point I'm going to be bringing up through the course of the video is that this game is polished. Put as simply as possible, the game looks incredible. The Last of Us Part 2 does an incredible job at taking the foundation of the first game and polishing things without betraying the look of the original. It feels in-world, and I can't stress enough how much that is a good thing. They don't feel like different characters from when we first met them. The textures of the character models, the buildings, plant, and wildlife are all improvements from Part 1 in seemingly every way. In the first video, I made a critique of Part 1 being more or less claustrophobically linear. The adventures and world felt so padded out that it felt like there was no room to stretch my legs. In Part 2, however, I feel as if the issue has been more or less checked off. The game is still linear, but there's actually room for a true feeling of exploration in the areas of game you traverse. From Part 1 to Part 2, you truly feel the passing of time through the world. Traveling through the game, you'll see more than your fair share of plant life, as if nature is doing its part to take back what belongs to it. This gives a place that's cleared of nature's grip a sort of out-of-place artificial feeling in a way I rather like. Speaking of artificial feeling, the last thing I want to talk about is the open world segment of the game. As I stated in The Last of Us Part 1, I said it felt rather claustrophobic within the game, but this almost does the reverse. It's suffocatingly open in a way that makes it seem like its only true purpose is to extend game time for no real reason. Other than that, it feels like Naughty Dog saying, haha, look at what we can do now. Alright, let's talk gameplay. Once again, I get a sense of polish in this title. Everything is functionally the same from the first title to the second. The only mechanical addition I can think of is that you're able to go prone in this title. The gameplay systems within the title are the combat, which is based around striking, countering, stealth, and gunplay. Apart from that, we have light, and I mean very light, puzzles on the occasion. The striking and countering is, as I stated in my retrospective Part 1, the bare minimum of what I look for in combat. You have a button to strike, which is based on if you are holding a weapon of some kind, making your attacks more lethal. The dodging is as simple as it sounds, but let me just say I had so much fun with this dodge button while actually playing this game. Fighting hordes of zombies with my fists and just barely dodging the strikes thrown out makes them a lot more exciting than just shooting them with a gun. While I did rather enjoy seemingly brawling with the infected, it was definitely the thing that took me out of the experience. Realistically, I should not be throwing hands with the infected before me. I should be taking them as an obstacle into consideration and taking them down in a safe manner. But I still had fun doing it though. In addition to that, it's a good way to save ammo. The stealth. The stealth hasn't really changed in any major way in my eyes. You sneak around the terrain that you're placed in, taking out enemies quietly. I guess the only real change comes from the inclusion of the prone button that I talked about earlier. I guess one big thing I wanted to talk about was the advancements in the AI within the game from part 1 to part 2. I'm not sure how to best explain this, but the AI just feels smarter in this game. They cover each other in path a little better, giving a true sense of coverage, making it feel harder to actually take a stealthy approach. It gives a certain terrifying feeling to intelligence compared to the mindless zombies. To sum things up, the stealth segments with actual humans feel a lot more tense. There is an addition what you face off against. On the side of the humans, you can get pitted against a juggernaut-like human. I'm rather fond of this addition personally. I do tend to like variety in the forces opposing me. It would get rather boring if every enemy was the same. However, on the side of the infected, there are actually two types of new enemies. The first being the Chandler, which out of what I read is an alternate fourth stage of the infected, separate from the bloaters. The difference apparently comes from the environment. The difference in gameplay, however, I didn't really notice without paying close attention. I guess one of the characteristics is not being as strong as the bloater. Other than that, they spray a gaseous poison from their pustules. The last inclusion of infected enemy is the Rat King. This is an absolute juggernaut of an enemy. Stronger than anything before, this enemy comes from a merging of infected over a long course of time. This is truly the closest thing to feeling like a boss fight in these games, which plays at the Dark Souls fan in me, but feels so very apart from the rest of the game. It feels more like it belongs in Resident Evil. I want to say the coolest thing about this all is it continues to solidify the world. It's only natural that some of the infected would continue to evolve over the course of time, and even cooler when you think about all the potential different variations due to environment. Although I didn't find myself playing too differently from one infected to another, I think the infected enemies are truly interesting and a good inclusion to keep things fresh. But I'm just referring that they are used in ways to break up gameplay for being stale and boring. Delving back to what we are in control of is mainly two characters, Abby and Ellie. Being in control of these two characters reminds me of Resident Evil 3. The main difference I can think of is the different guns that each character possesses and upgrade bats. Other than that, the delineation between them is only seen throughout the story in front of us. I'll wrap this segment up by doubling back to intelligence is truly terrifying. The infected you come across might as well be feral animals because they act as such. They use instinct to approach and attack you. To contrast this is the humans. They move slowly and carefully. They have weapons to cover ranged combat, already adding a tool to make the humans that much more threatening. I can't just carelessly run at enemies in front of me. They methodically cover areas on top of that, and they cover each other, adding an extra layer of difficulty in attempts to take one out. I actually found far greater success not trying a stealth approach and taking things to a firefight. The thing that made me shy away from this approach at all is the scarceness of ammo to compensate for the amount I would expend during the fight at hand. Having to consider all this when taking on any kind of opposition adds a certain credence to everything. At the end of the day, we're in an apocalypse. Yes, while I would say this game is in fact a mark of polish, it also is presented to me as a failure to evolve. This combat system was originally pioneered from what I know as the first Uncharted title. It comes across as a lack of ability to do anything fresh, but I understand the experience of these games is not held up by the combat. It's just here to be the thing you do in between its bits of movie presented to you. Alright, we've covered how the game looks and feels. Now I want to get a little bit more abstract by discussing some themes present within the game. Something I upheld as being one of the most important themes was the theme of revenge. In my head initially, this game was a love letter to the idea of revenge, and I do believe there's still a certain truth to that. But I think something that actually fits a little bit better is the theme of justice. And while the idea of Bat Ellie makes me laugh, I do think that the theme of justice not only covers the same points that revenge does, but a handful more. The justice done in the first game was from the point of view of Joel. It was his own sense of justice to rescue Ellie and kill all the people within the Firefly facility that was opposing him of rescuing Ellie, even the doctor that was ready to operate on her. This caused a chain of events for one of the major plot points in which Abby is enacting her sense of justice, to find Joel and kill him. And continue on the sense of justice, Ellie wants to dish out to Abby for killing her father figure. Even within the communities within the game, such as the Fireflies, the WLF, the Seraphites, and the Rattlers. These communities all have their own set of beliefs and their own sense of justice entangled with that. Justice as a theme seems to be a bit more of a coverall. The things I want to talk about from this point on are not as general, but more specific thoughts that have kind of popped up in my head while thinking about this game. I think at this point I want to go over the character development. The character development in these games feel a lot different from part 1. In part 1, you could feel Joel slowly opening up to Ellie and being more warm and caring towards her throughout the course of the game. In part 2, it feels like we get bits of character development instead. One would be Ellie letting Abby go at the end of the game, and the other that comes to mind is Abby and her fear of heights. I understand that this is a small way of them humanizing Abby, but it just feels so strange when you have a character that's been shown as, in so many ways, an absolute force of nature. Obviously, there are other examples with Abby and her becoming more of a generally warm person. We have her scenes with Owen, and the biggest point is her helping Lev and Yara. I just generally feel like I have to think a little harder at where the character development is in part 2, but in part 1 you kind of feel it spread throughout the course of the whole game. I think at this point I wanted to bring up Joel. Joel in the first game was an absolute force of nature. He felt unstoppable. It didn't matter what was in front of him, he could truck right through it. If he has a goal, he'll do everything he has to do and kill whoever he has to get the job done. This is contrasted in the second game where they make Joel feel helpless. I understand that some time has passed and he's a little bit older, but seeing him in such a weak, helpless state is a little bit jarring. Joel has truly taken the place of a father figure to Ellie. Even when Joel is at his weakest, practically at death's door, Ellie is in disbelief and is expecting him to just get up and fight them all off. This really hammered home a feeling of nobody in the story being safe, and anyone and everyone was on the table to die in this game. I'm not going to go over too many specifics within the story, but what I do want to bring up is that there is a constant power struggle within the story, with Ellie going after Abby, Abby going after Ellie, and Ellie once again going after Abby to finish things. Obviously enough, Ellie is not Joel. If you flip the tables, yes, I believe Joel would have went after whoever hurt Ellie and would not have stopped until that person was dead. But I don't think Joel would have wanted Ellie to seek after some kind of revenge. What I do believe is that instead he would want Ellie to live her life and be happy. Branching off of this a bit, I want to discuss the mindset of Ellie. In The Last of Us Part 1, we know Joel rescued Ellie from being operated on. This in turn would have led Ellie to feel that she was stripped of her life's purpose. This new life was given to her because of Joel, and yes, she does eventually find out that it was all a lie, but there's nothing she can do about it at this point. The person who could have done the work to operate on her is dead, so she's left to live her life with this constant weight on her shoulders. In a way, I'm sure she feels indebted to Joel, because everything she has in her life is because of Joel saving her to begin with. So now that that man is gone, she can't help but to feel that she owes her life to exact a revenge for him. We talked a bit about Ellie. Now, I feel it's only fair to talk about Abby. To be frank, I don't really care about Abby as a character. If you play the first game, it's hard not to have a certain bias towards Ellie and her endeavors. After all, they're trying to make me feel for a character that is just being introduced versus a character that we had a full game to get to know and grow attached to, and for some, 7 years after that fact. They try their best, and they, in my mind, do a good enough job to make me feel she doesn't deserve to die, but at the end of the day, I still don't care about Abby. She grows as a character, and they do show that she does have her own problems with her complex relationship with Owen, her helping complete strangers with Yara and Lev, her getting over what feels like a misplaced fear of heights, the death of her father, and her quest to avenge him, but compared to Ellie, she just feels a little bit bland as far as the personality is concerned. To be honest with you, I think the story, much like part 1, would have been more suited to a book or Netflix series with a dedicated season to Abby to make us feel more invested in her as a character, versus her being limply introduced and trying to give us a reason to care about her as we progress the story in attempts to kill her. This story plays with a lot of extremes, but something I actually wanted to ask is if a generic story would have been more fitting. Hear me out. Ellie finding out what Joel did at the end of part 1, running off, seemingly getting kidnapped by some unknown assailants, Joel seemingly having to find and rescue Ellie, and by the end of it all, Ellie forgiving Joel for the act he had committed. This story is functional, yes, but would it have been a satisfying one to play after 7 years of hype building up to part 2's release? I wouldn't say so. One of the things I really enjoyed about playing through this game was the flashback sequences we had with Joel and Ellie. This filled in some of the blanks through the passage of time. Seeing them together again left you with a warm feeling, which was quickly taken away by being snapped back to reality. This, I believe, is to remind Ellie of what she's fighting for, which makes things rather confusing for the player because you don't really know who to root for. The game tries to tell you that Abby is actually a good person and deserves to live, but the story also preys upon The Last of Us Part 1 player. Something I actually wish they did is play upon Ellie's trauma from the events that happened leading to Joel's death, where we as the player would get a chance to play in the headspace of Ellie and her trauma, and some kind of dream sequence reinforcing the guilt she feels and giving the player a sense of ownership towards it, or maybe just a deeper understanding of it. I think after all this I'm more confused on my actual standing with this game more than ever. Maybe a second playthrough is in order. To briefly summarize, we have wonderful graphics which only have been improved but do not betray the first game. A combat system which is simple but very effective and well suited to the game it's placed in. At the end of it all, much like the first game, you don't come to this game for gameplay. Although the gameplay is sound, it's far from what upholds the experience of this game. A story that leads you to be conflicted on what side of the fence to be on, but I ultimately feel as if it would have been much better suited to a book or Netflix series of some kind. We needed far more time with Abby to actually lose this bias that we have towards Ellie, and there's just not enough game for us to do that. At the end of it all, I don't really know what to make of this game. My heart tells me it's good, but it did take a fair bit of time for me to take off the rose-colored glasses with this title. My feelings are still changing towards this game as I think of new things, but I do feel like it was a good idea to compress some of these thoughts into one place. I think at this point, all I want for you to do is make up your own mind and thoughts and feelings of this game. In my eyes, it comes down as a worthy title to invest in your time just to see exactly how you feel. Well, I think that's where we're going to wrap things up. I do want to thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys found this video entertaining or helpful, spread the channel and kind of get the word out there. If you guys want to see more, check out the rest of the channel, and in the description there's links to not just my main channel where you guys can actually find this Let's Play, but a whole bunch of other content as well. Anyways, I'll see you guys later. Peace.